this distinguished panel, but I'm certain that you've got better questions. Okay, so I think I really want to have a conversation about how we keep power prices affordable. And so one of the things I jumped to, and I think you jumped to also, Claire, is network costs. So if you think about it generally, most everyone agrees that electricity consumption is going to double over the next 20, 25 years. And if we double the cost of networks, any kind of cost savings from renewables go out the window. So how do we get more out of the network that exists is a primary part of this, affordability challenge. Networks are 40% of the bill today. What do you reckon, Claire? How do we do it?
How do we... Is that on?
I think so.
Hello? Yeah. Look, I mean, I think utilisation is key, right? We have latent capacity sitting in the networks today, so we know that, less than 10% of our grid infrastructure is used outside of peak times. And so I think as we connect those new loads through electrification, whether that's data centres or simply EVs, etc., having them connect into parts of the network and being utilised at times of the network where we have latent capacity is our best way of actually lowering the unit costs of delivering network infrastructure.
Yeah, is this something that you look at all in the UK, Rob?
So I think in the UK context, I've alluded to, I'm just speaking to my lapel mic, right? Yeah. I mean, so I've alluded to this already. Transmission distribution is different questions, okay? Because you saw the map. The transmission build is playing catch up. At the moment, our constraint costs, so this is paying wind farms to turn off, mainly but not only in Scotland, and paying a gas station to turn up in the southeast of England. Because there's a network constraint which the system operator is balancing through the balancing mechanism, which potentially is a rather inefficient way of doing things. That's running at £1.5 billion per year, with projections it could go up to as high as, some people say 8. I think that's an exaggeration, but £3 billion per year by the end of the decade. Really the only way for us to address that is to continue with the transmission build. We're not going to pause the transmission build. I think ships have sailed in terms of how we finance that transmission build, in that a lot of it's in flight. We're making a big ask of the transmission owners. The balance sheet wise, we're asking them to kind of, make huge investments on top of their existing assets. If we could, have a time machine, the questions would be, well, what's the amortization period? Why are you using 45 years? These are long-lived assets. Couldn't you use 60 years? Is there some way that you could get some government involvement in the financing of those assets? Could you have an investment, a repayment holiday, so that you can kind of smooth that out, so that you get the demand growth? The problem we've got is we've got this hump where we're building out the asset base, but the demand growth's not there yet. So that's that. And on the distribution network side, there's a long-standing debate around whether or not we could do more flex, understanding the headroom we've got at different voltage levels. However, there was a National Infrastructure Commission report, which is a Treasury agency led by a very distinguished engineer called Nick Windsor, a couple of years ago, that basically came out in favour of significant distribution network upgrading. That may or may not get reopened, to your point about whether we can use that more efficiently. I suspect that the price pressures means that's not done yet, that's not fixed, it's almost fixed. Our regulatory period for that is running. It's called ED3. It's running now to do those determinations. It's possible that we could kind of adjust downwards on the distribution network, but on the transmission network, we need to. In the UK context, that's what we need. But I think that, think about the financing, think about the relationships between who owns what and does what, and this is a grand transition. We should think as boldly and radically as we need to, and I think sometimes we haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I guess my 2 cents on this, and I recognize that network utilization doesn't sound sexy, but it really is a pivotal part of this transition. And I guess the way I would try and discuss it is that we've got this $88 billion is the ballpark number for the value of the electricity distribution network. And we don't want that number to increase anymore. And in fact, we don't have to significantly if we take advantage of other investments, primarily that households and small businesses have already made, to make sure that those assets are used in an efficient way to keep network capacity low. All right. So that is one thing that we can do that will benefit all households. But nevertheless, there are big network costs. And so there's an ongoing debate that was touched upon really at the moment about how do we share the cost of the network among households. So this is, and if you think about the fixed cost of the network, ECA has done a fair amount of research into this. Our numbers are that in Australia, roughly 80% of the distribution network, this is local poles and wires, 80% of it is fixed. Like it exists, it's not going anywhere. One of our research team found a study from the US that said 90% of the distribution assets in the US are fixed. So mostly these costs are fixed costs. Today, we recover them primarily through usage charges, but based on how much energy you use. Do you think that still makes sense, Claire?
I think you've probably oversimplified it, to be honest, but I think there are a difference between long-run marginal costs and short-run marginal costs in the network. And I think when you start to think about the incentives you want to face households, if you moved just to fixed pricing, you would see a lot of customers disconnect from the grid, and that wouldn't be in anyone's interest. So a cheaper grid is a shared grid. So I don't think the simple answer is just to say we've got fixed costs, we should make every household pay a fixed cost. I think we need to be thinking it in a bit more sophisticated terms than that. So from my perspective, there might be, or from our perspective, there might be increased role for looking at pricing and how network costs are recovered, but I'm not sure it's as black and white as a fixed variable sort of split. I think it's looking at, what portion, what blocks, how are we thinking about long run costs, how are we thinking about short run costs, how are we thinking about behaviour. I mean, flattening the load profile is also critical to bringing down system costs, and so that's something we're really focused on as well.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to oversimplify it. I don't think it's all fixed or all variable. It's got to be an appropriate mix. I do think there's an open question about the role of pricing to impact all consumers' behavior, but maybe I'll leave that there. Rob, what does Europe and the UK look like in terms of fixed costs?
Almost as if you'd asked me this in advance, Brian. I've done a little bit of digging around and just checked my facts. So our standing charge is about £300 per year across gas and electricity, and it's a 54p per household per day. Okay. I think that means it's a little higher than yours. A couple of years ago, our regulator, Ofgem, proposed that all suppliers should offer a zero standing charge tariff. They then consulted over that. They then rode back from that for some of the reasons that you've just articulated, because of concerns about it would be regressive. Notwithstanding what I said about not being very sunny, you could have a solar array and an EV, live in a large house, pay zero or very low electricity bill. That would not seem to be particularly fair. As of 4 days ago, four UK suppliers are now offering, on a trial basis, a zero standing charge, higher volumetric charge tariff. So we're going to see where that goes. One of the things I think is really important to think about in this, so there's a kind of holy grail of some kind of energy service provider that you pay a fixed tariff price to, whether you've got a solar panel or you've not got a solar panel, or whether you've got batteries behind the meter or anything else, and they do all of the clever stuff for you, and you contract for coolth and warmth and so on, and your bill is fixed, or your bill is a bit like your broadband. I think we're some way away from that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't aspire to that. But there's a few kind of intermediate steps, and so one of the other things that I've just sort of had a quick look at, just to make sure I was right in my kind of intuitions. So I checked with Copilot, so it could be complete nonsense. However, my sense was that quite a number of our near neighbours have standing charges that are linked to the amount of capacity that you want, in terms of kilowatts, rather than ours is just fixed. We've got actually really quite high. We've got usually 100 amp fuse. I think we've got 20 kilowatts coming into most houses. Standing charge is not varied by that. France and Spain, they've got a kind of small capacity, 3 kilowatt, quite very low in the case of France, €100 a year or so standing charge. But if you want more capacity, because you've got, I don't want to stray into this because you might need a lot more capacity because you've got a badly insulated house or you've got a large family and you might not be rich. But apocryphally, you've got you need to heat your swimming pool and charge your EV and run your aircon. You pay for you pay for 9 kilowatts, you pay for 12 kilowatts, and so on. Rising block tariff is an alternative way of thinking about that. Again, I think we should be open to learning internationally. We, the UK, should learn from our near neighbours, and we should also learn from the other side of the world. It clearly is difficult to move in the direction where some more affluent households are, because of technological change, not required to pay for the system that they still need. That seems wrong. At the same time, we have a kind of TV personality, money-saving expert, Martin Lewis. Maybe he's found his way over here. He's campaigning for the abolition of standing charges. So this very quickly becomes quite politically charged, and then that maybe means that the rational evidence of finding the right middle ground, which is your point, finding the right middle ground that is fair.
Yeah. Love the top question from the audience. So is there so much latent capacity in the distribution network? If there is so much latent capacity in the distribution networks, what is the AER doing to reform efficiency and utilization criteria?
Look, I do think it's a great question. And a lot of our work in recent years has been looking at how we incentivise networks around demand flexibility and obviously dynamic operating envelopes and export limits, flexible export limits, and how they make better use of the grid infrastructure sort of through dynamic system operation. That's critical. I think also, though, how we incentivise networks is an important part of this as well. And so, we've done work with you, Brian, and looking at utilisation criteria or measurement tools. We've been thinking about it in the context of the incentive schemes we currently operate. As you would be aware, we've been very encouraging of the Australian Energy Market Commission in undertaking their review of network regulation, and we're really keen to use that process to kind of explore, have we got the right tools and incentives on networks around some of these things. We've increasingly been looking at RAB per kilowatt hour or megawatt hour and RAB per customer metrics as opposed to just RAB in absolute terms. And so, from our perspective, it's absolutely, and I printed a T-shirt, right? I mean, everyone should know that by now in this room. So the mantra of the AI is let's use more before we build more.
I did happen to hear that termed differently recently, which is before you capitalize, you have to utilize, which, anyway.
It's just people trying to improve our logo, but that's fine.
So I might jump around off the screen. And so, Rob, I was really struck in your presentation by, the fact that the UK has quit coal. How'd you do it, in any lessons? Because we still have 14 of those machines kicking around.
Okay, this could be a rather long history lesson. So, I'll start from how not to manage a really significant social transition, and you need to go back to the 1980s, when it was the National Union of Miners was at war with the Thatcher government, and there was a 2-3 year long miners' strike. I was a child at that time. It was hugely socially disruptive. If you get to the kind of beginning of the liberalisation, privatisation, liberalisation era, that's kind of done. Although it's really important to bear in mind that doesn't mean we weren't still producing domestic coal, and it's also important to bear in mind we still had sort of contracts between, at privatisation, the duopoly, National Power and Powergen, were required to buy a block of coal from amount of coal from the National Coal Board. At that time, those contracts sustained all the way through the 90s. But the thing that happened in the 90s was a confluence of cheap natural gas, CCGT technology being permitted to be built, what were then called the RECs, which were the regional electricity companies, different market structure now, were able to contract for or build themselves or get an IPP to build a new CCGT that would sell them electricity at base load that was cheaper than they could buy from the two duopolies, the duopoly incumbents. So that was the dash for gas. That wasn't orchestrated by the government. What we were also doing, we had 80% of our electricity from coal in 1990, is our sulfur gases were blowing across the North Sea and causing forest death in Germany and Scandinavia. That wasn't acceptable, so the EU Large Combustion Plant Directive effectively required acid gas removal. However, gas-fired power stations don't cause that problem, and that changed the relative economics of those two. It also made it very unattractive, or in fact completely unattractive, to build a new coal-fired power station. In some respects, through a kind of big social battle between left and right in the 80s, followed by the dash for gas, followed by some acid gas deposition, scrubber technology requirements, we kind of ended up in a situation where it was clear that our coal stations were life limited. So I don't want to make this sound easy, but all you needed to do is kind of push. So we also put in place a carbon floor price in 2014 or so. That was an uplift on the then EU ETS because, as you might remember, we used to be part of Europe. We're now somewhere adrift in the mid-Atlantic, I think, but who knows? So that tipped the marginal plant in favour of gas. That reduced coal utilisation. And then ultimately, it was an act of political will to decide we don't want to keep some of those plants on standby. We want those plants to close.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, the issue here is not that they're economic. They're not. It's that, or most of them are not, or many of them are not. It's that reliability often sort of demands that they run. Claire, any thoughts from you about sort of how we facilitate the transition off coal?
At first, I thought you were retelling the story of Billy Elliot, but then I worked out you had a broader point. Look, I think our situation is probably slightly different in the sense that we have fully depreciated assets sitting in our market. One of the challenges is that they will make lots of money at times, and then eventually they won't make any money. And I think at the moment we have a problem where some of those facilities may be underinvesting in the reliability of the plant, and I think that is affecting prices. So one of the things we see in the wholesale market is it's not average prices are dragged up by what we'd call high price events. Now those high price events may not happen very often in a quarter or even in a month, but when they do happen, they're very high and they drag up that average price. Now, more often than not, when we get a high price event, it might be because we've got low wind, or it might be because the clouds have rolled over Sydney, or it might be because a coal plant's fallen over unexpectedly, or a transmission line is on an outage. But when you get a confluence of those things, and you can sometimes see rebidding by the large coal fleet at that time as well, and batteries, it drives up prices, and that's dragging up the average. But that lack of reliability of coal plants is also reducing the willingness of the owners of those coal plants to contract. And then the volatility we're seeing in power markets is increasing the desire of retailers to have contracts. So the prices of those contracts go up, and it's the prices of those contracts that flow through retail prices. So coal has a very big impact, sets price 40% of the time in our market. So I think we should really be looking very closely at the role coal has in prices in our wholesale market in recent years.
Yeah, and it sounds like maybe some of those market price settings as well. I guess one of the things you were talking about, how prices can get so high in our market. The AEMC just announced, this is already issued, but they just announced that for next financial year, the market price cap can be $23,200, which is more than 3 times higher than the next global market that has an energy-only market. So that's ERCOT in Texas, which in Australian dollars, the market price cap there is about $7,500. Now there's a strong debate about what the market price cap should be and the price settings. I I do think that somewhat, I quite enjoyed the debate. I think others did as well, and it was an abstract debate about governance. But in practical terms, there are real governance questions about the market, the energy market. So one that people would be aware of that's been in the news recently is IEMO's market governance is being reviewed. 40% of the membership of IEMO is held by industry. The other 60% of membership is held by government. There's an open question as whether or not that remains fit for purpose. The price settings, this price setting that's 3 times higher than the next global comparator, is largely set. It's technically set by the AMC, but it's largely set by something called the Reliability Panel, which has a lot of generators on it that have influence. It has consumer representatives as well. But there's an open question to me about whether or not that remains purposeful. The AER sets prices otherwise. I might just let that sit there and not make you comment on it, Claire, and jump to a different question that I hope you will comment on, which is, what do you think about the proposed solar sharer in terms of addressing affordability?
I feel like Ralph's sitting there like shooting daggers at me. But look, from our perspective, one of the things we think is important in terms of driving down costs, both at a network level and a wholesale level, is flattening the load profile. So getting people to actually shift load where they can into the middle of the day to get that flatter load profile is going to be key, not just to bringing down the cost of peaking contracts, but also network infrastructure. And so, whether Solar Sharer ends up with 1 million customers on it, which I don't think it will, but, or it ends up with, a handful of customers on it, it is a really big behavioural signal to the sector and to the market and to consumers about when is the time that we want people consuming energy. And so if we have these flexible loads and those loads are obviously capable of being moved into the middle of the day, we really want to move them. And I think this could be a really good way of getting that message out and actually incentivising that behaviour.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that our surveys say is that only 25% of customers understand what the energy transition means for them. And I do think in that sense, just to your point, this large announcement around Solar Share does indicate that one of the things it means is you should use more energy in the middle of the day. One of the other top questions here is, how much of a difference does mission control, what agency charged with meeting targets, make? Has that sped up decisions?
Okay, so I'm somewhat biased in that I sit on the Mission Control Advisory Board. It's a really, really interesting innovation. So it's not an independent agency. It's actually a unit within DESNZ, the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. There are many other delivery units, and there's other bits of governance and non-departmental bodies and so on. But it's tasked with identifying how this could be done, reporting directly to the Secretary of State, doing everything in its power to ensure that the mission is delivered. The mission is not to blindly go after 2030 clean power at all costs. That was made clear in a number of speeches last year. That is subject to affordability concern. And I think, something of a pivot to be more concerned about that for very, very good reasons. But it has a kind of convening capability. It has the ability to knock heads together and to come up with solutions to problems. So that would be, for example, in thinking about whether or not the interaction between transmission use of system charging and the CFD regime is fit for purpose. That would be really down at the working level with the TOs. They're trying to build new transmission lines, local planning, national level planning responsibilities in government, and Ofgem that obviously has a role in setting the regulatory environment for the network assets in order to overcome problems. One of the things that is very apparent to me as a non-civil servant is often it's fighting battles within the department. But fighting battles within the department is a useful thing to do if you're trying to achieve a goal. So I think it's a fascinating innovation, and my, albeit biased, view is that it is demonstrably delivering results. So
maybe in 15 seconds, how How do you define affordable, Claire?
Well, we look at share of wallet, right? So, I mean, if you have a look at the Retail Market Performance Report by the AER done annually, we do have a number of affordability metrics in there, but the biggest one is looking at the share of wallet for not just average income households, but low income households as well.
Rob, do you have
I don't think you can divorce affordability from perceived affordability and from the politics of it. If you look at, we've got a gas and electricity bill of about £1,500, £1,800 at the moment. That's higher than it was, but in real terms, at a time when the price of everything is going up and households are feeling squeezed. If political opponents of the transition are then going to make political capital of that affordability is, by definition, not acceptable to people, because otherwise they wouldn't be attracted by those arguments. So I don't think you can divorce it from the politics of it, because both Britain and Australia are actually for the most part, very wealthy countries, and we ought to be able to, without any great difficulty, afford this transition, notwithstanding all of the distributional impacts and taking care of the less well off and avoiding the left behind and all of those things. And you could say, well, how much do you pay for your mobile phone? How much do you pay for your household insurance? How much do you spend on beer? And I don't think there's an objective metric, therefore. There are objective things that you can measure, what we used to be called fuel poverty, the households who are genuinely unable to afford their bills. One of the blocks in one of my diagrams is the amount of household debt that is sitting on, costing, I can't remember exactly what it is, 40 or 50 pounds per year per household, because that debt will basically never be recovered. So that means those people can't afford to pay their bills. So somewhere within all of that, I don't think you can take the politics out of it, is my short answer.
Fair enough. Well, we're well past time, so please join me in thanking both Claire and Rob.